Hi everyone, so today we're going to be looking at genotypes and phenotypes. So the study design dot points that you need to know are the use of symbols in the writing of genotypes for the alleles present at particular gene locus, and the expression of dominant and recessive phenotypes, including codominance and incomplete dominance. So a little bit of a review of what we've just learnt. So we know that we are diploid organisms and we contain 2 copies of each chromosome and gene. So we have a paternal chromosome or gene and a maternal chromosome or gene. So one from your biological father and one from your biological mother. So you can have a maximum of 2 alleles per gene. And each copy of the alleles can be the same or they can be different. For example, if we're looking at blood groups, you can have the A and B blood group or alleles, or you could have both A alleles on each chromosome. So let's look at genotypes and phenotypes. So to put it simply, your genotype is your genes and your alleles. So that's all your genetic information. That's your DNA. It's the code. Your phenotype is the observable trait as a result. So observable doesn't mean you can just see it. It might be observable in the sense that we can use scientific technology to observe a specific trait, like your blood type, because you can't see with your own eyes the blood type, but we can do tests to determine the blood type. So that's what we mean by observable trait. We also call your phenotype your expressed trait, because your genotype, so your genetic information, codes for your phenotype. So your phenotype is determined by your genotype. Over here we have an example. So we have a rabbit. This rabbit has 2 chromosomes, and this is the fur color gene. So this rabbit has obviously 2 genes, fur color genes. Both of these alleles are black alleles. So they've got 2 of the same alleles. That's their genotype. These alleles code for the black fur color, which is the rabbit's phenotype. That's the observable trait, or the rabbit's expressed trait. So what happens when you have 2 different alleles? Which allele will be expressed? And this is what we're going to go into. So for example, if you have dimples, here is a very simple diagram of how this works. So the black alleles over here code for dimples, whereas the white alleles code for no dimples. So a person with these 2 alleles will obviously have dimples. A person with these 2 alleles will have no dimples. However, we might have a person with 1 allele for dimples and 1 allele for no dimples. What is expressed then? Well, that really depends on whether it is a dominant allele or a recessive allele. A dominant allele will always be expressed and masks the other allele. It is represented by a capital or uppercase letter. So for example, this capital A over here, we can say that is a dominant allele, and this capital F down here is also a dominant allele. Whereas a recessive allele is only expressed if there are 2 recessive alleles present. And it is represented by a lowercase. So this lowercase a is a recessive allele, this lowercase b is a recessive allele, and this lowercase f is a recessive allele. So for this example, we have 2 chromosomes here. The A allele up here, we have a dominant allele and a recessive allele. This dominant allele is the allele that's going to be expressed. It's going to mask this recessive allele. These 2 B alleles down here are both recessive, and you can see that by the lowercase. So the recessive phenotype will be expressed because we have 2 recessive alleles. Whereas up here, the dominant phenotype will be expressed because we have a dominant allele masking the recessive allele. So if you have 2 identical alleles, for example, you have capital H and capital H, or lowercase h and lowercase h, this is called homozygous. So you can be called a homozygote, or you can be called a homozygous individual, or it's a homozygous trait, and so on. If you have 2 different alleles, for example, a dominant and a recessive, as you can see here, you are heterozygous or a heterozygote. As you can see here, we have, I believe this is for a particular disease, I think. And so we have one mutated gene over here. So we have two different alleles. The blue allele is the capital, so it is dominant, and the purple allele is the lowercase h, so it is recessive. So we've got a dominant allele here and a recessive allele here. The mother has two recessive alleles, and they will pass on one of those alleles, so one from the father and one from the mother to each of their children. As you can see here, the father is passed on one dominant allele and the mother is passed on one recessive allele, and we have another heterozygous individual. However, here the father is passed on the recessive allele to this son, and the mother has passed on a recessive allele to this son, and this child is homozygous. These are a few different terms I want you to know because this is how we describe genotypes and phenotypes. So you can be homozygous dominant, meaning you have two dominant alleles, as you can see here, two capital Bs produce this purple flower. You can be heterozygous, so you have two different alleles. Capital B, lowercase b, still get a purple flower because that capital B is masking, or the dominant allele is masking the recessive allele. Or you can be homozygous recessive, so you have two recessive alleles. So lowercase b, and therefore the recessive phenotype is expressed. So I want you to know these terms. So homozygous means the same, so either two dominant alleles or two recessive alleles, and heterozygous means two different alleles. What we've been talking about so far is called complete dominance. So this means that when the presence of one allele results in an observable trait and masks the other allele's phenotype. So for example, if we have a dominant allele, it's going to mask the recessive allele. So if we have these two flowers and we breed these two flowers together, we've got two dominant alleles combining with two recessive alleles. All the offspring, so that I guess children, but offspring is the more scientific word that we're going to be using, have the dominant and recessive allele. And this dominant allele masks the expression of the recessive allele. So that's what we call complete dominance. For heterozygous organisms who have a dominant and recessive allele, they can still pass on that recessive allele, even though their dominant allele is masking the presence of the recessive allele. If they are heterozygous, they are known as a carrier because they can pass on that recessive allele that they are carrying. It's important to note, however, that dominant alleles aren't always the most common or the better or healthier allele, and we kind of tend to assume that. For example, in Huntington's disease, the dominant allele is what causes the disease, or in polydactyly, which is extra digits on your fingers, for example, it is the dominant allele that results in this phenotype. So far, we've been looking at a lot of genes that only have two alleles, a dominant and a recessive. However, some genes will have more than two alleles, and we use superscripts to write these alleles. So the little letters up the top, that's what we call a superscript. So for example, you could have CA, CA, CA and CB, CB and CB, or in these rabbits, as you can see here, there is a variety of different alleles that exist for fur color, and it's the combination of the different alleles that result in the fur color. But there is more than two, and so there can be more than two phenotypes as well. A common example of this is the human ABO blood group. And so we have three alleles that determine our blood group or our blood type. So because you have two copies of each allele, that means there are 6 possible genotypes, which you can see up here. Those are the 6 possible genotypes, but there are only 4 phenotypes as a result of these alleles. So you can have the A and B alleles and have AB blood group. You can have the recessive alleles and have an O blood group, or you can have 2 A alleles or an A and a recessive allele and have an A blood group. You can have 2 B alleles or a B and a recessive allele and have a B blood group. Codominance is another type of expression that I want you to know, and this is when both alleles are fully expressed. So this is different to what we've been talking about so far. Both the alleles are fully expressed, and we use superscripts to represent these alleles. Neither allele masks the other, and that's important to know. A common example of this is speckled chickens, horse coat color, the human ABO blood types that we just saw, sickle cell anemia, and some flower colors. So this is an example of speckled chickens. For example, we have a parent here that has two B alleles for the black feather color, and this other parent has two white alleles for the white feather color. They combine their alleles, so one black and one white, and the offspring has one B allele and one white allele, and this offspring expresses both at the same time. So we get a mixture of both. It is a speckled chicken. Another expression of alleles that I want you to know is incomplete dominance. So this is different again. This is when neither alleles are fully expressed, and we use superscripts to represent the alleles again. It's when a hybrid of both alleles is expressed. A hybrid means a mixture of both. So we have a red flower over here breeding with a white flower, and we have a hybrid of both alleles producing a pink flower. How I remember this is that incomplete dominance is when we have an in-between expression of both alleles, and neither are fully expressed. So it's important to note that some traits are determined by a combination of multiple genes. We've been looking at traits and phenotypes that are determined by a single gene, but there are many traits that require multiple genes working together to produce a phenotype. And so the greater number of genes involved means there's more possible combinations of alleles and phenotypes that exist. And this is what increases genetic diversity in the population. For example, eye color is determined by 16 genes. That's why we have many different eye colors, because it is the alleles on all 16 of these genes interacting with each other to produce eye color. Your height is determined by approximately 50 genes. It is the combination of all 50 of these genes and their alleles that determine your height, and this is why we have such a wide variety of heights in our population. And also skin color, which is determined by 4 genes, and you can see in this image over here the combination of all these genes and alleles and how it can produce a very large variety of skin color. So I want you to also know the difference between autosomal and sex-linked traits. So autosomal traits are determined by genes on your autosomal chromosomes, whereas sex-linked traits are determined by genes on your sex chromosomes, so your X and Y chromosomes. And we use superscripts again to write the sex-linked genotype. So it could be XB or Y plus or something else like that. Obviously, your sex-linked genes are found on your sex chromosomes. It is often closely related to the biological sex of the organism. So the traits that we find on these chromosomes are related usually to the sex of the organism, but not always. There are about 4,000 more genes on the X chromosome than the Y chromosome. As you can see here, the X chromosome is much, much larger than the Y chromosome, so you can see how there is many more genes on the X chromosome. When we talk about sex-linked traits, we're often referring to X-linked genes. So that means genes on the X chromosome, because these are more common. Y-linked traits, so traits that are controlled by genes on the Y chromosome, exist, but they're rare, and obviously they are only present in males. So your X-linked traits are also more likely to be seen in males. This is because they only have one X chromosome, so males have X and Y, so whatever is on that X chromosome will be expressed. There is no other allele for males because they only have one X chromosome, so if there is a particular condition or abnormality connected to this allele, it will be expressed. Also important to know that males cannot pass on their X-linked traits or conditions to their sons, but they can pass it on to their daughters. A common example of an X-linked trait is color blindness, which is a controlled by a recessive allele or determined by a recessive allele. It is more common in males because obviously only one X chromosome, so if they inherit an X chromosome with this recessive allele, they're going to express the colorblind phenotype. Females can be a carrier if they're heterozygous. It is unlikely or very low chance of females having color blindness because they have two X chromosomes, and it's likely that they have a dominant allele that masks the recessive allele. Here is a diagram that kind of explains all of this. So we have a parent here with the, a female parent here, so the mother with the dominant allele and the recessive allele. And remember, it is the recessive allele that is the faulty color vision allele. So this recessive allele will determine color blindness, or will cause color blindness. So the mother can pass on the dominant or the recessive to each of her children. If the recessive allele is passed on to her son and combined with the father's Y chromosome, we have here a son that is colorblind. This daughter over here has inherited that recessive allele. However, because she's also inherited the father's dominant allele from his X chromosome, that dominant allele masks the recessive allele. And so while she's not colorblind, she is a carrier, and she can then, like her mother, pass that on to her sons. All right, as usual, I'm going to leave you with this funny meme. Write down any questions you have and bring them to class, and I will see you there.